Well, that was a little bit painful, wasn't it? That was hard work. I don't even really know when to begin. And this is going to take place separately from my analysis videos, because in those videos I like to sort of delve into the detail, and that involves usually rewatching the game so I can sort of pinpoint where I think the game was won and lost. I can't do it with this England team, that game in particular, because there was so many just weird errors, weird mistakes, weird just decisions tactically, personnel with players. And again, people are trying to position blame on anything they can. And I said in the previous video I did about England that I'm not Gareth Southgate in, I'm not Gareth Southgate out. I find both sort of positions sort of a bit exhausting, to be honest with you. So I'm going to try and remain as level-headed as I can. But that was tough. That was so tough. And Southgate couldn't have gotten it any more wrong, in my personal opinion. Now, is there some stuff that I have a little bit of sympathy for? Yes, because he mentioned in his interview after the game about Calvin Phillips and how he didn't have anyone to replace Calvin Phillips. I get what he means by that. Don't get me wrong, did he need to bring Calvin Phillips into it? Hell no, he's an idiot for even mentioning his name, because of just, you should have been smart enough and wise enough to know what that would have brought. But we do have an issue in midfield, and it does centre around Declan Rice. And I feel like I have a bit of a reputation on this channel for not rating Declan Rice. I think Declan Rice is a very, very good midfielder. He's not world class. The idea that he's been compared to Rodri is mental, and that needs to stop. He's nowhere near his level. He has got a very good role within a very well-structured team. He's a fantastic engine. His counter-attacking from a defensive point of view, in terms of the way he wins ball backs on transition, is phenomenal, probably the best in the world. His ability to drive with the ball as well from deeper areas into space is key, which makes him such a handy player in that sort of left 8 position for Arsenal. But in terms of, and Gary Neville mentioned this on ITV, in terms of taking the ball from his centre-backs, basic as being kind, it looks like he needs about 7 to 8 touches to finally turn around and then play the ball forward. Technically, in those deeper build-up areas, he is so poor. But the problem is England do not have a player that can sit in the base of that pivot and play that way. Kobbie Mainoo is maybe the one, but I don't think he's fit for that holding midfield role. I don't think he's defensively disciplined. I don't think he covers ground transitionally as well as Rice does, which is important for international football. You could argue Adam Wharton, who I think is a phenomenal player, and is someone I would like to see in that role. It's maybe a tournament too soon. I think Lewis Cook, someone mentioned it in my comment section the other day, and I feel bad for not mentioning your name, because it's not on the top of my head right now, but you hit a nail on the head. He'd have been a fantastic player to use in this system, with Declan Rice sitting in the further 8 and giving more freedom to Jude Bellingham. I'm going to go over Denmark in their possession phase, because there wasn't a real build-up for Denmark, because we just sat deep and sat so far off them it wasn't even true. So I'll just sort that one out right now. So Denmark would play in their 3-2-5 shape. The 2 wide 10s, Jonas Wind and Christian Eriksen. The wing-backs pushing on Joachim Mæhle and Victor Christensen at left-back. And the back 3 that consisted of Andreas Christensen, of Joachim Andersen and Yannick Vestergaard. And England, again, just sat off them, sat so deep, just soaked up so much pressure for needless reasons, and there was no press from the midfield, and that was my biggest issue. Is sometimes you'd see it drop initially from the wide players being pushed a little bit further up. Jude almost in a 10 and Kane as a striker that doesn't really press. He hasn't pressed for a good few years. And Trent Alexander-Arnold and Rice was sat so close to that defence, so close, to the point where if Kieran Trippier went out to Mæhle on this right-hand side, Rice would be in that back 5 covering that space there, which would in turn force Bellingham back into a deeper position, which would force Philip Foden back into a deeper position, and it was just constant cover in that space in the deeper area, which is why when their midfielder, whose name escapes me, again, I haven't come into this video well prepared at all, this is just purely ranting, got on the ball from about 30 yards. He was able to take a touch, pick his spot, and get the right technique in his striking of the ball, because he had no pressure on him, because they were sat so deep they couldn't get out to him, and how they were so comfortable doing that with Rice and Trent Alexander-Arnold sitting on top of him. And you'd see Bukayo Saka coming down to this area as well to take care of Victor Christensen on this side, which meant Kyle Walker could sit in a bit narrower. So with Rice and Bukayo Saka back, it turned into a back 6 at points, with the rest of the team back in a lot deep, Kane dropping in so deep as well. And the issue with this was in transition, it then meant that because of Kane's deepness and because of the lack of real support he had, and there was the debate afterwards on BBC, which I have to say, look, I think Gary Lineker, Miko Richards and Rio Ferdinand, they're all obviously fantastic ex-professionals. They're all good TV presenters, all good pundits. But it really showed the difference in how just an ex-player pundit talks about the game to how someone who thinks and works on tactics daily does. And I thought the way Thomas Frank conducted himself within that was excellent and very underrated. And he's a good speaker, Thomas Frank, and he does a lot of like the Monday Night Footballs and punditry and stuff whenever he gets the chance. And he always comes across, I think, brilliantly. Makes his points clearly, eloquently, and goes into detail that you don't hear. And you got a lot of the cliches that you get from British media sometimes with Kane. He looks tired. There's a slight lethargy to his play. And Thomas Frank was saying, no, Kane's just kind of doing what Kane does, but he wasn't getting the support. Kane needs direct runners around him. With Bukayo Saka pushed so deep by this play, he couldn't get up the field quick enough. Foden isn't going to run in behind like that from these deeper areas. Bellingham isn't either. He'll break away with the ball, but there was no one to break lines. And you have that in Anthony Gordon sitting on the bench. You have that counter-attacking threat. You've made the decision to not bring Marcus Rashford, but then why is Kane dropping deep? And against Serbia, Kane was occupying centre-backs, and he was getting close to those players, and he did so at the detriment of not having as many touches on the ball as he's more used to having. And it worked to an extent because Serbia were occupied, so it meant that Saka could get one-on-one with the wing-back. It meant the other centre-back was pushed out to close down Bellingham or Foden in those wide 10 positions. And again, I'll give a little bit of a blight to Southgate on that, because Kane was played as a disciplined 9, pushed further up the pitch, and there was criticism for it. He dropped deep to get on the ball a lot more in this game, and there was criticism for it. That's one of those situations where I feel like it goes a bit too far on Southgate, because he can't win either way. Both ways didn't work. And why he changed it, because I didn't think that approach was bad in the Serbia game. I just think they needed to sustain it over a 90-minute game. If you watched my analysis on that, I said there were some things I liked about that England performance. That first 30 minutes was fantastic. It dropped off, and this game, it never even started. And as a result, Kane dropping deep meant that when he got the ball, there was no real counter-attacking option. Saka couldn't get up the pitch quick enough. And again, Trent Alexander-Arnold's performance has been criticised. But again, when you're sat so deep and then you get the ball, your use is to be that counter-attacking playmaker. Who's he hitting? He's getting nothing from deep. That's not going to change with having Wharton, with having Mainu, with having whoever you want to chuck into that position in there, because they have no one to hit from those deeper areas. So it just became a lot of hoofed long balls that Denmark could easily rectify. And Denmark, by the way, are a slow team. Those back three are not athletic. So in this situation against Saka, if he was pushed a bit higher up, if it was an Anthony Gordon in this position, they'd have been toast. They would have had to drop off a little bit deeper, which could have given them more room to the likes of Bellingham, to the likes of Kane in these positions, in between defence midfield, especially in transition. And the balance had been completely ignored by Gareth Southgate. As much as you want to blame people like Trent Alexander-Arnold, as much as Trent Alexander-Arnold's catching a lot of flack, Harry Kane, what could they do? What could they hit with their angles? There was nothing for him to work with. Defensively, couldn't understand it, weren't pressing at all. In the first half of that Serbia game, they pressed well. There was nothing of that in this game. So deep, soaking up so much pressure and brought so much danger to themselves. In possession, was it any better? We'll go over that. So if you remember in the Serbia game, the box midfield was used to great effect with Harry Kane occupying the centre-back, Jude Bellingham coming into this position, allowing Phil Foden to come in here, Kieran Trippier, which he didn't do enough of, but was maintaining the width on this side, and the midfield four of Rice, Trent Alexander-Arnold, Bellingham and Foden. The other three, bar Rice especially, with their fluidity and their movement to create angles and manipulate the Serbia shape to get on the ball and create and pass through, with Kane occupying the centre-back, forcing them back, made it a nightmare for the opposition team to deal with, because sometimes you'd find situations where Foden, Bellingham and Trent were in this midfield line and the wide centre-backs couldn't come up to press because there was always going to be an extra man in these situations, with the likes of Rice, Stones, Gahey and Walker putting it through the lines. And then there would be the situations where Saka would move into the inside 10 position and Kyle Walker would overlap as well. So there was just a complete central overload that Serbia couldn't come to terms with, and that is what ended up getting England their goal in the first 15 minutes. While I can only assume that was still maybe the intention for this game, the staticness of these players was, I mean, I'm trying to use a word that doesn't sound insulting or rude, but mental. Whether that was still the intention, I don't know, but it did change slightly, and it turned into more of a 4-2-4 with Phil Foden occupying a more wide left position at points, and Harry Kane dropping in. Wasn't occupying the centre-back or the wide centre-backs as he was in the previous game to pin him back, and so as a result, it meant that these wide centre-backs could come and press Jude, could come and press Harry Kane while having a man spare in the centre, and even the times that Phil Foden would come in, there was no real connection with Jude Bellingham, and it was easy for the wing-backs or the wide centre-backs to cover them, and even still trying to get Trippier on the ball, which didn't work as well. He's just not cut out for that left-back position where you need to overlap and attack. The only time I remember him really getting on the ball in that first half, he hit a crossfield pass that he overhit and it went out for a throw. And it was just static between these guys, between Kane, between Bellingham, between Foden, and there was no real connection this time. There was no real movement with Rice and Alexander-Arnold, and it felt easy for the Denmark team to deal with. And they weren't pressing at the start, Denmark. They were sat off them a little bit and trying to reduce that space in behind. And then I think they realised how sort of flaccid, I'm going to say, this England were in possession. So they did start pressing them a little bit more in these deeper areas if I just move it back. So when Pickford would play it out to the one side, let's say if it was John Stones, then Denmark could start squeezing them up here. Jonas Wind on Gahey, then you'd get the Denmark midfielders on England's midfielders, you'd get Jonas Wind onto Kyle Walker, you'd get Højlund pressing up onto Stones, and they could squeeze them on that pitch because England would just resort to long balls, and god damn it, Pickford's distribution was horrific. I said it in the first game, I'm saying it again, his distribution is overrated. I'm not a fan. Just reckless long balls that lead to nothing and just constant turnovers of possession. Nowhere near good enough for an international goalkeeper that can't complain about a lack of experience anymore. And as I said, Kane in this position wasn't occupying the centre-back and winning fouls and getting England up the pitch like even he was in the second half against Serbia. It wasn't going so well. Just dropping deep to get on the ball, not really providing a factor to play around with. Jude Bellingham I thought was poor. I thought he was really poor. Foden was better, but I still thought, again, there was a lack of real connection in this area with the central players. And then when he made the changes, and I don't have those players available to me right now to replicate it was Eze on for Foden, it was Ollie Watkins on for Kane, it was Jared Bowen on for Bukayo Saka. So you're replacing Bukayo Saka with a player that, without any disrespect, is the same, just not as good. Phil Foden, you're replacing with a player that, again, is the same type of player, just not as good. You're offering a different threat with the striker in terms of Ollie Watkins will run the channels in behind, and he'll try and get in behind and occupy centre-backs a bit more than Kane will when he drops in. So I appreciate that, but then, by that point, Kane had been taken off. You're taking Trent Alexander-Arnold off for Gallagher, and so there was a real lack of technical quality in the counter-attacking passes. Kane and Trent Alexander-Arnold are your two best passers in the team. What they were crying out for in that first half was players to play it through to on the counter-attack, direct options they could hit. You had that in Watkins, and you had Jared Bowen on the pitch, who threatens in behind the line the way that Saka does as well, but with no one to hit him with it. So they had to try and play through the lines and hope that Denmark by that point was shattered. Poorly managed game by Gareth Southgate. Dreadful. And look, these second game and group stages are the weirdest voodoo for him I've ever seen in my life. Everything he's working at just seems to fall apart. Scotland, USA, and now Denmark. Just nowhere near good enough. I still expect him to get something against Slovenia that sees us through top of the group. But again, you just have these same worries that the moment we come up against a team with real quality, they will find us out and they will exploit us with the quality that maybe Denmark lack. But who knows? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Sorry for the rant, guys. Don't mean to be Mr. Negative, but I just can't lie about what I see. But see you in a bit, lads. Have a good one.